Hello everyone! So in this video I'm going to look at some of the signs of autism that I did display when I was a child. I've written a blog about this, so you do go and check out my blog as well if you want to read it as well as listen to it. So these are some of the signs, some of the signs I showed of autism when I was growing up. Firstly, I refer to myself by name instead of saying I. This is something that my parents, my mum in particular, picked up on, and she just thought it was a little bit quirky and a little bit odd, but she obviously didn't know this was a potential sign of autism. Now, many non-autistic kids also do this, so in and of itself, this doesn't mean a child is autistic just because they do this, and many toddlers do this as well. It can actually be, apparently it could be a sort of it could be part of normal development, but most children do outgrow this after about the age of like 2. In autism, and again, it doesn't always occur in autism, and it's not a sign. It's only a potential sign in conjunction with other signs, if you like. You have to look at the whole picture. But in autism, apparently, children, from what I've heard, from what I've been told, children, it's quite common for autistic children to refer to themselves by their name for a lot longer than, say, typically developing children. And I was certainly still doing this at the age of 4.5, which is pretty late. You know, most typical children by that age do start to refer themselves more uniformly as I, whereas I was still quite often talking to myself by name. So to give an example, I have a recording of myself aged of about 4.5 when I'm with my grandmother, and the conversation goes like this. She says, "Would Anna like to pick up the post, or shall I do it?" And I reply, "No, Anna wants to catch the post." And I would refer to myself as she a lot as well. And my mum said she found that a little bit odd, but she didn't know the reason for it. Another potential sign was that I was a tiptoe walker. And again, non-autistic kids can often walk on tiptoes as well, particularly in toddlerhood. It can be just part of normal development. But again, non-autistic kids tend to outgrow this, after toddlerhood, and in autism, this tends to carry on much longer. Not all autistic kids do this. You might have done, if you're watching and you're autistic, like I said, you might not necessarily have had this quirk because it's just one out of many potential quirks, but it is one of the potential signs. It can be an indicator, in some kids, an early indicator, not just of autism, but other developmental problems as well. It can suggest something atypical is going on if a child is still walking on tiptoes, beyond toddlerhood. And I did that. I was a chronic tiptoe walker. When I didn't have my shoes on, or when I was wearing plimsolls, like those really thin canvas shoes like you wear at school, I would always walk on tiptoes. And the reasons for this, I didn't question it at the time. I just knew that it felt really uncomfortable to have my feet flat on the ground. But, that's alright, I didn't question it. It just felt more natural, normal for me to walk on tiptoes, so I walked on tiptoes. But my mum found it a little bit odd, and she would try and get me to walk properly, like flat feet. But I didn't. I carried on walking on tiptoes, habitually. And also walking with my feet flat on the ground, it felt quite wobbly. I couldn't balance so well with my feet flat on the ground. My feet would just kind of wobble. So it felt like I had more balance and it felt more secure walking on tiptoe when I didn't have shoes on. When I had shoes on, I could walk with my feet flat on the ground. It's a lot easier because I think the shoes, like thick shoes, as long as they weren't just canvas plimsolls or ballet shoes, proper shoes, I think they provide more support to the feet, so I could walk with my feet flat on the ground when I had those shoes on. It was kind of specific to when I had no shoes on, when I had plimsolls on, socks on, or bare feet, I had to walk on tiptoes. Something to do with the contact between the ground and my feet. I felt very uncomfortable, particularly walking on kitchen surfaces. But I still find this to this day, even though I now can walk with my bare feet flat on the ground, and I'm better able to do that. And particularly when I'm with other people, I try and mask it now because I realise it looks a bit odd to walk on tiptoes. When I was younger, I didn't realise it looked odd. So now I kind of force myself to walk with my feet flat on the ground when I'm with others. I'm sort of like masking it, but it's still more natural for me to walk on tiptoes. And when I'm on my own, even when I'm with my support worker, I'll sometimes find myself up on my toes because I forget to mask it. It's kind of just natural to walk on tiptoes when I don't have shoes on. But yeah, particularly when I'm on my own, I just walk on tiptoes because it's just easier to do that and it just feels better. And I like having a tension in my calves, that sort of tension you get when you walk on tiptoes. I don't know, it just makes me feel more kind of secure. And yeah, so it might be related, probably is related to the sensory side of autism as well. But yeah, so tiptoe walking. Also, when I'm really excited, I quite like to pace on tiptoes as well. Another sign, spiky profile. This is apparently one of the red flags or telltale signs. It can be a real telltale sign, not just of autism, but other developmental conditions as well. It sort of suggests, let's say, that the child is not developing typically, because in typical development, skills tend to be kind of very closely aggregated with one another. So, if you're, everyone's got strengths and weaknesses. So non-autistic people, they're going to be better at some things, not so good at other things. That's natural. We all have strengths and weaknesses. But in typical development, you're not going to see a massive gulf between strengths and weaknesses. You're going to be a little bit better at something and not quite so good at something else. But it's still going to be, in the same kind of similar level, shall we say. Whereas in autism, there is a massive divide, sometimes even within similar skill sets. So it doesn't follow, for example, that just because you can read well, you're going to have comprehension. That's the same skill set, whereas in a typical development, someone might be, a reading might be a strength, and if it's a strength, usually comprehension will be pretty much as good as mechanical reading, if it's a strength, because it's in the same skill set. Whereas for me, I could read really, really well, but I didn't have any comprehension. That's caught up now. I have a lot better comprehension than I did. Because we all develop, and as I've got older, I think some of these skills have become more closely aligned. But I still have a spiky profile. When I was a child, this was off the radar. It was a 40-point discrepancy on IQ between verbal, which was high-end average, to non-verbal, which was non-verbal. My non-verbal was between 58 and 74, which is kind of in it. That's in LD range, but because it was non-verbal and not verbal, in this society we put a lot of emphasis on verbal. So because I've got a good verbal intelligence, I think people often forget that my non-verbal practical intelligence doesn't necessarily follow because of this massive uneven split between different skills. And so that was one of the signs. Also, I was really extremely disorganised. Now, this is a little bit ironic because one of the things that sort of put me off the scent with autism when I was a teenager, and my parents were suggesting I was autistic, I was like, no, I'm not autistic. Autistic people are like really neat and tidy, and they line things up and everything's really neat. Because this is a stereotype that's often portrayed in the media, that autistic people are really neat and tidy. And some of them are, it has to be said, but not all of them are. And an actual fact, being disorganised can actually be one of the signs of autism. But it's one of the signs that isn't often shown in the media. Because the sort of like extreme organisation and kind of being really ordered is often only in a really narrow area, and it's often actually to offset the general chaos. So my life in general is really chaotic, and I find it really hard to organise myself. So I'm often like quite messy, and I don't like mess. I find mess really anxiety provoking, but I find it really hard to deal with mess. And in other parts of my life, like my interests, I could be extremely focused and finicky, and everything has to be absolutely perfect. So I think that's maybe where the stereotype comes from, but it's only in really narrow areas, and that will vary from one autistic person to another, but it's often within a sea of general disorganisation. So it's a little bit ironic, that. An art teacher when I was at secondary school said I was the worst tidier-upper she'd ever met. She actually put that on my leaving, when teachers wrote down little snippets of information about you, when you were leaving school. She said I was the worst tidier-upper she'd ever met, so I used to just leave drawers open, like newspapers on the floor. This was the case at primary school as well. It was mentioned in my educational psychology report. I just used to dump everything in one place. My parents had to help me with organisation, making sure I took everything to school, that my backpack was tidy, so I really struggled with that. Noise, of course, sensory issues. Yep, I was terrified of thunder, fireworks, balloons popping. Got really very easily overwhelmed in group situations and parties, often kind of shut down and became very quiet, but I just put this down to kind of introversion and sort of shyness because I didn't realise I was autistic. I just thought, I'm just quite sensitive, and I didn't question it, because you don't question it, because if it's your normal, you just put up with it and you just think, this is just how I am. You don't really think it through. But obviously these problems with noise have followed me all the way through my life. It's just that I didn't realise at the time that I had a name for it. Obviously now I know it's all part of sensory, autism, which I didn't realise at the time. I didn't have a word for it, I didn't have a name for it. yeah, I took things literally, misunderstood instructions. One example of this, I mean, there are other examples. I don't have time to talk about them all in this video, but when on my 6th birthday, I was at a hotel with my grandparents having lunch. The owner said, "What?" He said, "If you don't hurry up," he said, "I'm going to come kick you out of a hotel." I really believed he was going to come and kick us out, so I ran out onto the balcony and I hid under the tables because I was absolutely terrified because I saw this man coming and literally painfully, physically booting us out of a hotel. Of course, he didn't mean that. It was a joke. As I've got older, I think I'm not as literal as I used to be, because obviously, like, you do grow and you do develop, and I'm no way near as literal as I used to be. I'm a bit more better able now to kind of think things through a bit more, but I still do sometimes take things literally, or I don't see for I need things to be exact. I find it hard when people don't say what they mean, and when they're not clear. I need it because otherwise I just start obsessing about it, and that can lead to a whole load of anxiety. Yeah, and obviously I was really obsessed with certain things. Like, I've always been an obsessive